He waited until the whole house was asleep before he crept into the nursery and disappeared with her 3-month-old son. No goodbye note, no phone call, just silence and an empty crib still warm from the baby's body heat. That man was her own father-in-law. And by the time she woke up screaming that morning, he was already 3 states away, hiding a baby that wasn't his to take. But here's the thing nobody expected. He couldn't hide forever. Stay with me till the end because this story has a twist that will change everything you think you know about this family. And if you love stories like this, hit that subscribe button right now before we start because you don't want to miss what's coming. My name is Chinaza Okonjo, and before that morning in October, I believed I had the perfect family. I was 26 years old, married to a good man named Chidera, and 3 months earlier, I had given birth to the most beautiful baby boy anyone in Enugu had ever seen. We named him Kambili. He had his father's nose and my eyes, and when he laughed, the whole house seemed to light up. I thought nothing could ever touch that kind of happiness. I was wrong. Chidera's father, Chief Obinna Eze, had never liked me. From the very first day Chidera brought me home to meet his family, I felt it, that cold, assessing look in the old man's eyes, like he was calculating something, and I was not part of the equation. Chief Eze was a wealthy man, a respected elder in our community, a man whose word could silence a room. He had built a name for himself in the transport business, owned 3 houses, and sat on the board of 2 different town unions. People greeted him with both hands and bowed their heads. But behind closed doors, that man was cold as Hamatan wind, and I never understood why he looked at me the way he did, like I was a problem waiting to be solved. At first, I told myself it was normal. Every mother-in-law, every father-in-law, they test you a little, don't they? They want to see if you are strong enough for their son. So, I endured his sharp comments about my cooking, his refusal to call me by name, always addressing me as that girl, even after the wedding. I endured the way he would visit Chidera's office to just remind him in front of colleagues that he could have done better. I endured all of it because I loved Chidera, and Chidera loved me, and I believed love was supposed to be enough to survive anything. But then I got pregnant, and something in Chief Eze shifted. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't excitement about becoming a grandfather. It was something else, something sharper, more watchful. I remember the day I told the family I was expecting. Everyone cheered, everyone hugged me, except him. He sat in his chair, swelling his glass of palm wine, staring at my stomach like he was looking straight through it, searching for something. Chidera didn't notice. He was too busy celebrating. But I noticed. A mother always knows when danger is close, even before she understands what the danger is. When Kambili was born, the celebrations in our compound lasted 3 days. Drummers came, women danced, Chief Eze slaughtered 2 goats in celebration, and for a moment, I let myself believe I had misjudged him. Maybe becoming a grandfather had softened something in his heart. Maybe I was wrong about all my fears. I was wrong about being wrong. It started small. He began visiting more often than usual, always arriving unannounced, always asking to hold Kambili the moment he walked through the door, sometimes even before greeting me. He would take the baby into another room, close the door, and stay in there for long minutes, murmuring things I couldn't hear. When I asked Chidera about it, he laughed it off. That's just how our fathers are, he said. They bond differently with their grandsons. Don't read too much into it. But a mother knows. A mother always knows. One evening, I walked into the guest room to find Chief Eze standing over Kambili's cot, not smiling, not cooing like a grandfather should. He was staring, his lips moving silently, like he was praying, or perhaps cursing, I couldn't tell which. When he noticed me, he didn't flinch, didn't apologize for being caught in such a strange moment. He simply looked at me and said, "This child does not belong only to you." Then he walked past me and left the house without another word. I told Chidera that night, my hands shaking as I recounted every detail. He held me, told me I was overthinking, that stress after childbirth could make anyone paranoid. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was imagining monsters where there were only strange old men set in their strange old ways. That's what I told myself, because the alternative was too terrifying to accept. 3 weeks later, my son was gone. It happened on a Friday night. Chidera was traveling for work, a 2-day trip to Lagos for a business deal that couldn't wait. I was alone in the house with Kambili and our house help, Ifeoma, who slept in the boys' quarters at the back. I fed Kambili at 11 p.m., rocked him to sleep, laid him gently in his crib and locked the nursery door out of habit, the way I always did. I fell asleep around midnight, exhausted the way only a new mother can be. I woke up at 3 a.m. to the worst silence I have ever heard in my life. You see, there is a particular kind of silence that comes from a baby monitor when the baby isn't breathing beside it. And there's a different, more horrifying silence when the baby simply isn't there at all. I don't know how I knew before I opened my eyes, but something in my chest cracked open and I ran to that nursery so fast I nearly broke my ankle on the stairs. The crib was empty. The window, which I always kept locked, was wide open. Curtains dancing in the night wind like nothing was wrong, like my entire world hadn't just ended. I screamed. I screamed so loud that Ifeoma came running and the neighbors woke up, and within 20 minutes, half the street was in my compound and I was on the floor of that nursery, unable to breathe, unable to think, clutching an empty blanket that still smelled like my son. The police came. They asked all the questions police ask. Did I see anyone suspicious? Did I have enemies? Was there a ransom demand? There was no ransom demand. That's what confused everyone. Kidnappers ask for money. Whoever took my son wanted something else entirely, and that terrified me more than any ransom note could have. Chidera flew back from Lagos the moment I called him, and I have never in my life seen a man break down the way he broke down when he walked into that empty nursery. He fell to his knees, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw him cry. Not quiet tears, but the kind of sobbing that comes from somewhere ancient and broken inside a person. It was Ifeoma who first said the words I hadn't allowed myself to think. "Madam," she whispered to me 2 days later, when the police had gone and the house had grown eerily still. I saw Chief's car that night, around 2 a.m. I thought I was dreaming, but I saw his driver's car parked outside the gate just for a few minutes. Then it left. My blood went cold. I confronted Chidera immediately, and to his credit, he didn't dismiss me this time. His father had been acting strange for weeks, we both knew it. But accusing your own father of kidnapping your child is not a small thing, not in our culture, not in any culture. Chidera called him. Chief Eze denied everything, his voice booming with offended pride through the phone speaker, calling us ungrateful, accusing us of trying to blame him for our own carelessness. He hung up before Chidera could say another word. But something about that phone call didn't sit right with either of us. His anger had come too fast, too rehearsed, like a man reciting lines he'd prepared in advance, rather than a grieving grandfather genuinely confused by an accusation. We drove to his house that same night. It was empty. Not just empty, abandoned. His wardrobe was half cleared out. His safe, usually locked behind a painting in his study, stood open and bare. His driver was nowhere to be found, and neither was his second car. Chief Obinna Eze, respected elder, wealthy businessman, grandfather of the year in public, and cold stranger in private, had vanished into night air, and he had taken my son with him. Now, before I continue, let me remind you, if this story is gripping you the way it gripped everyone who lived through it with me, please hit that subscribe button, because what I discovered next about why he took my baby is something none of us saw coming,
and it will completely change how you see this story. Stay with me. The weeks that followed were the darkest of my entire life. I stopped eating properly. I stopped sleeping in our bedroom because I couldn't stand looking at the empty crib through the connecting door. Chidera hired private investigators when the police made no progress. We offered a reward. We printed flyers with Kambili's photo and pasted them across 3 states. Every night, I lay awake wondering if my son was crying somewhere, wondering if he was being fed properly, wondering if he even remembered the sound of my voice. Chidera's mother, Mama Adama, was just as devastated as we were, which told me something important. She wasn't in on it. Whatever Chief Eze had done, he had done it alone, in secret, hidden even from his own family. That detail haunted me. What kind of plan requires a man to deceive his entire family, to abandon his house, his business, his reputation, just to disappear with a 3-month-old baby? 2 months passed with no leads. The investigators found nothing. The trail had gone completely cold, and I began to lose hope in a way I didn't know a human being could lose hope and still breathe. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, Ifeoma came to me with something that changed everything. She had been going through old newspapers Chief Eze had left behind in his study. The police had cleared the house of obvious evidence, but nobody had thought to check old newspaper clippings, the kind an old man keeps for sentimental reasons. Tucked inside a folded copy of a paper from nearly 30 years ago, Ifeoma found a photograph. It was a picture of a baby boy no older than a few months, and on the back, in handwriting that had faded but was still legible, were the words, "Emeka, before they took me from me." I stared at that photograph for a long time before I understood what I was looking at. Chidera had a brother, an older brother none of us had ever known existed. I brought the photograph to Chidera immediately, and I watched the color drain from his face as he stared at it. He called his mother that same night, and what she told us finally cracked open the truth that Chief Eze had buried for 30 decades.
30 years ago, before Chidera was born, Chief Eze had another son with a woman who was not Mama Adama, a relationship he had before their marriage was formalized, back when he was a struggling young trader with nothing but ambition. When that woman discovered she was pregnant, Chief Eze's own father, a proud and rigid man, forbade the union, insisting the woman was from the wrong family, the wrong background, unworthy of the Eze name. Under pressure, young Obinna Eze abandoned the woman and the child, choosing his family's approval over his firstborn son. Years later, he learned that the woman had died in poverty, and the boy, his son, Emeka, had been taken away by relatives of the mother and raised somewhere far from Enugu, his identity, his very existence erased from the Eze family history. Chief Eze carried that guilt for 30 years. Mama Adama said he rarely spoke of it, but on the nights he drank too much palm wine, he would sometimes mutter a name, Emeka, and weep quietly where he thought no one could see him. Now here is the twist that changes everything. Just months before Kambili was born, Chief Eze had finally located his long-lost son. Emeka was alive, living 2 states away, and through him, Chief Eze had discovered something that shattered his entire understanding of his own family and filled him with a terror none of us could have predicted. Emeka, it turned out, had fallen into serious trouble. He had gotten involved with a dangerous group of men, ritualists who trafficked in stolen infants for use in dark ceremonies, believing the blood of a firstborn grandson from a wealthy lineage carried special spiritual power. And in a horrifying twist of fate, one of Emeka's associates had somehow learned about Kambili, about the Eze family's newest grandson, born into wealth, born into a bloodline that these men believed was spiritually potent because of Chief Eze's own rise from poverty to power. Chief Eze had overheard a conversation, accidentally, through his estranged son Emeka,
who, in a moment of drunken confession, revealed that his associates were planning to kidnap Kambili for a ritual scheduled to take place at the end of that very month. Emeka, despite his criminal entanglements, still had enough conscience left to warn his father, perhaps as a way of seeking the forgiveness he'd never received. Chief Eze was faced with an impossible choice. If he went to the police, the ritualists, men with powerful and dangerous connections throughout the region, would simply strike faster before proper protection could be arranged and might even eliminate witnesses, including Chidera and me, to cover their tracks. If he told Chidera and me the truth, he feared panic or worse, that we might confront the men directly and get ourselves killed. So, Chief Eze, in his own broken, guilt-ridden, deeply flawed way, made the only decision he believed could save his grandson's life. He would disappear with Kambili himself, hide him somewhere no one, not even his own family, could accidentally reveal, and protect him personally until the danger had passed. I need you to pause with me for a moment because I know this is a lot to take in. This story only gets more intense from here, so if you haven't already, subscribe now, turn on notifications, because the next part, the part where I finally found my son, is something you do not want to miss. When Mama Adama finished telling us everything Chief Eze had confided in her in a final phone call weeks earlier, a call she had been too frightened and confused to mention until now, Chidera and I sat in stunned silence. Our rage at the old man twisted painfully into something more complicated. He was still wrong. He should have told us. He should have trusted his own son and daughter-in-law enough to bring us into the truth, rather than tearing our family apart with grief and suspicion. But now we understood. He wasn't a monster stealing a child out of cruelty. He was a broken man, haunted by one abandonment 30 years ago, willing to become a fugitive rather than risk abandoning another grandson to danger. But understanding his reasons didn't tell us where Kambili was. And if what Mama Adama said was true, my son was still in danger because the ritualists, having lost their target, might not simply give up. We went back to the police with this new information, but bureaucracy moves slowly and I couldn't afford to wait. Through Mama Adama, we managed to get a phone number for Emeka, the estranged half-brother none of us had ever met. It took 3 days of calling before he finally answered, his voice guarded, suspicious, clearly frightened by his own criminal associates.
I begged him. I told him I was a mother who hadn't held her son in over 2 months, that I didn't care about his past, his crimes, his mistakes. I only cared about finding my baby alive. Something in my voice must have reached whatever was left of decency in that man, because after a long, heavy silence, he finally spoke. "Your father-in-law is in Calabar," he said, "a small fishing town outside the city. He's using a fake name. He goes by Maziude now. Be careful. If my former associates find out you're looking, they'll come for the boy again." Chidera and I didn't wait for the police this time. We drove through the night, 12 hours straight, fueled by nothing but desperate hope and terror in equal measure. We arrived in Calabar as the sun was rising, and with the help of a local contact Emeka had reluctantly provided, we found the small rented house on the outskirts of the fishing town, hidden behind a row of coconut trees. Unremarkable, forgettable, exactly the kind of place a man trying to disappear would choose. I will never forget walking up that dusty path, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Chidera knocked on the door, and for a long moment there was nothing but silence. Then it opened, and there stood Chief Obinna Eze, thinner than I remembered, his beard grown out and graying, his eyes sunken from what must have been months of sleepless vigilance. He looked nothing like the proud, commanding chief I once feared. He looked like a man who had been carrying the weight of the world alone. And there in his arms, wrapped in a blanket I didn't recognize, was my son. Kambili was bigger, his cheeks fuller, but the moment he heard my voice break into a sob, his little head turned toward me, and I swear, even after 2 months apart, something in him remembered me. I don't remember crossing that threshold. I don't remember taking him from his grandfather's arms. I only remember the feeling of his small body against my chest again, warm, alive, breathing, and the sound that came out of me wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite laughing. It was something in between, something only a mother separated from her child and then reunited with him could ever understand. Chief Eze didn't fight us. He didn't run. He stood in that doorway and wept, an old, proud man finally breaking completely. And through his sobs, he told us everything. How he had spent months moving from town to town whenever he feared he'd been spotted. How he had barely slept, always listening to cars that shouldn't be there, always watching strangers a little too closely. He told us he had planned to return Kambili the moment he received word that the ritualists had been arrested or had abandoned their plan, but weeks had turned into months, and fear had kept him frozen, unable to trust that the danger had truly passed. It wasn't a perfect resolution. What he did was still wrong. Taking a child from a mother, even to protect him, even out of love twisted by 30-year-old guilt, is not something that can simply be forgiven with an explanation. And I told him so, my voice shaking with both fury and exhaustion. But I also understood in that moment, standing in a stranger's doorway with my son finally back in my arms, that this man had spent 2 months as terrified and sleepless as I had, carrying a burden he believed only he could carry, trying desperately not to fail a grandson the way he had failed a son 30 years before. The story doesn't end there though, because real danger doesn't simply disappear because a family reunites. With the information Emeka provided, and with Chief Eze's own testimony, once we convinced him to finally go to the authorities properly, the police were able to track down and arrest 4 members of the ritualist trafficking network operating between 2 states. It turned out they had been watching our compound for weeks before Kambili disappeared, which meant that in his own desperate, misguided way, Chief Eze truly had saved his grandson's life. Had he not acted when he did, acted before we even understood the threat existed, the outcome could have been the kind of tragedy no family ever recovers from. Emeka, despite his years of criminal entanglement, was given a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation and testimony against the network. It wasn't redemption, not fully, but it was a beginning. Chief Eze visited him in prison every single week after that, something he told me he should have done 30 years earlier when a frightened young woman carrying his firstborn child needed him most, and he chose his own father's approval instead. As for Chief Eze himself, he faced legal consequences for what he did. You cannot simply disappear with someone else's child, no matter your intentions, and the law does not make exceptions for good motives wrapped around bad decisions. But because he cooperated fully, because Kambili was returned unharmed, and because his actions, however wrongly executed, had ultimately protected a child from real and documented danger, the court showed leniency. He avoided imprisonment, but was ordered into counseling, into community service, into a long road of proving through actions rather than words that his family could trust him again.
It has been 8 months now since that morning I found Kambili's crib empty. My son is walking now, wobbly and fearless, chasing after a Felma's slippers around the compound and laughing that same laugh that once lit up our entire house. Chidera and I are stronger, though it took time, though there were nights we argued about how much blame his father truly deserved, nights we didn't speak to each other for hours, walking through a wound that cut deeper than either of us expected. And Chief Eze, the man who once looked at me like a problem to be solved, the man whose cold silence I endured for years, the man who broke my heart into 1,000 pieces the night he vanished with my son, that man visits every Sunday now. He sits on the veranda with Kambili on his lap, and he tells him stories, softer now, gentler than the chief I once knew. Sometimes I catch him watching Kambili the way he used to watch him before everything happened. That same intense, searching look. Except now I understand it wasn't malice I was seeing all along. It was fear. It was a father who had lost one son to his own pride, terrified beyond reason of losing another child he loved to a danger he alone could see coming. I won't pretend everything is perfectly healed. Trust, once broken that deeply, takes years to rebuild, if it rebuilds at all. There are still moments I look at him and feel that old cold fear creep back into my chest. Still nights I check Kambili's window twice before I can fall asleep. But I've also learned something about family, about love, about the terrifying, complicated things people do when they believe, rightly or wrongly, that they are protecting the ones they love. Chief Obinna Eze stole my baby, but in stealing him, in disappearing into the shadows for 2 long agonizing months, he also saved him from a danger none of us could have survived on our own. And in the end, he couldn't hide forever. Not from the truth, not from the law, and most importantly, not from the family who never stopped searching, never stopped fighting, never believing that somewhere out there our son was still waiting to come home. If this story moved you the way it moved everyone who lived through it, I want you to do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button, because stories like this one, stories about family, about the secrets we carry, about the lengths a broken heart will go to protect the people it loves, these are the stories that remind us how deeply, how fiercely love can survive even our worst mistakes. Drop a comment and tell me what part of this story shocked you the most, because I read every single one and I want to know if you saw that twist coming. Until next time, hold your loved ones a little closer tonight, because you never truly know what someone is carrying in silence. And sometimes the people who hurt us most are fighting battles we can't even see. Thank you for staying till the end. I'll see you in the next story.